Goodwill Gate and Speaker Gate. We talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the weekly program on state politics and government and how it might just affect you. Joining me this week on Capitol Review is Rebecca Anzel, State House reporter with Capitol News, Illinois. Welcome, Rebecca.
Thank you.
And also Sam Dunklau with NPR Illinois. Welcome, Sam.
Thanks for having me, Bruce.
Well, here we are in Springfield once again in the midst of a statewide, if not nationwide, firestorm when it comes to Land of Lincoln Goodwill Industries. Sam, give us the rundown on what's happened here in the past week, if you could.
Well, CEO Sharon Durbin had announced, actually last month, that the Land of Lincoln Goodwill was going to be laying off its employees with disabilities. And the reason that she had cited was that the state's minimum wage increase is going to be going into effect shortly. And you'll remember that the state is increasing the minimum wage from what it is now to $15 an hour over a period of a number of years. The first increase is going to start soon. And she had said, well, we simply can't afford to keep these employees on, at least not in a paid capacity. So we're going to lay them off and they can come back in some sort of job arrangement, but we won't be able to pay them. This had gone on for a month, and then WSEC-TV had reported and had broke the story and had said when they got a hold of one of these workers that was working at Land of Lincoln Goodwill here in Springfield, they can't do this. It erupted practically a national firestorm. Folks from Elizabeth Warren to Bernie Sanders had chimed in saying that what Land of Lincoln Goodwill had done here was just simply wrong. And in a matter of a few days, they completely backpedaled the decision, and all those workers will be going back to work.
Yeah, I've done a number of stories on Land of Lincoln over the years. In fact, when I came to Springfield in 2005, it was one of the first stories that I did, so I have some background on this. Let's be clear on a number of things here with that's happened here. We're talking here about approximately a dozen workers who are getting $8.25 an hour. They work in the back room of Goodwill processing, either putting clothes up on racks, that sort of thing. They're picked up at home each day, and then they're brought back each afternoon. They're not capable, apparently, of living independently. Nicholas Brown, who's become the poster child for this, fine guy. I spent a significant amount of time with him. He's 28, lives with his mother. He gets on 1 week's notice, hey, you're fired because we can't afford to pay you. 12 others are in the same boat. Some of them live in group homes. And what's happened here now is the media began reporting on this last week, and WCIA, as you mentioned, had produced some of the strongest stories on this. And it has become, in fact, a firestorm. First off, number one, Sharon Durbin screwed up. I think everybody agrees that she screwed up because, if nothing else, she said, well, this wasn't really a job for these folks. We had to go back and redo their work. Well, how would you feel if the job you did, somebody said, we're just treating you as a charity case, so we have to go back and redo your work. So that was seen as disrespectful, and I think rightfully so. Then it turned into, holy Lord, Sharon Durbin is making $165,000 a year, and she's doing this to all these disabled people. And her son, she's hired her son, and he makes $95,000 a year. What a catastrophe. However, all of this was known in 2013. Goodwill Industries here in Springfield did a cutback of disability programs 6 years ago. It was reported on widely in the media. Channel 20 did a report. Illinois Times did a report. The State Journal Register did a report. All reported, at least I know the State Journal Register and myself, reported, hey, Sharon Durbin makes some money. Her son works for her. What about nepotism? These issues were addressed 6 years ago. Now they're coming back with a vengeance. Twitter storms everywhere. What has changed in 6 years when essentially the same thing happened 2013? Goodwill gets somewhat of a pass. 6 years later, now Bernie Sanders is weighing in. Senator Tammy Duckworth says, not just the minimum wage for these folks that work at Goodwill, give them a living wage. That's, most people think of as $15 an hour. We brought up now there's something called a sub-minimum wage, which is highly controversial. What that means is that the disabled can be paid under federal labor law less than what a fully abled person is paid because they're considered less productive. You have to show, you have to measure their productivity and pay them proportionally. Other Goodwills where that's been done, and Goodwill here does it to an extent, hugely controversial, folks say, you know what, that is exploiting the disabled, and reasonable people can reach that conclusion. I guess what I'm wondering here, now you've got Senator Andy Manar is calling for investigations, the governor's office has weighed in, there's some senators, beyond just Manar, I believe Senator Kimberly Lightford has weighed in, Representative, I think Kelly Cassidy has said, geez, I mean, nobody agrees with what Sharon Durbin did. She's apologized. These folks are getting their jobs back. And at the end of the day, when she took over Goodwill, it was an agency with $6 million in annual revenue that was almost going under. The stores were staffed with temporary workers. Now it has $26 million in annual revenue. It has 450 employees. Those employees get benefits, they get vacation, there's an opportunity to advance. I've seen that. I shop at Goodwill, as you can tell. And so I guess, again, nobody's defending what Sharon Durbin has done here. Not even Sharon Durbin is defending what Sharon Durbin has done. Right. But what I am surprised by is the vociferousness of the outrage here. Yes, we should be outraged. But shouldn't we also be taking, a deep breath and saying, wait a minute, Goodwill does some good things too. And do we have to measure this in context? I'm just throwing it out.
Well, perhaps, but we should also maybe add, Bruce, that what the state particularly, I think, is focusing on in efforts from folks like State Senator Andy Manar, who you mentioned. I spoke with him yesterday. And they want to focus in on what the state has granted to places like Goodwill. You might have seen in coverage that, and know probably already, that places like Goodwill receive state and federal contracts in order to help them pay for folks like those that were laid off, to help them pay for job training and other things like this. And Senator Andy Manar, the crux of his argument is, well, none of that money was supposed to go and pad the pockets of Sharon Durbin or her son. And it doesn't appear as though he's backing off that sentiment. Additionally, he had said, if somebody like Sharon Durbin goes and makes the statements that she made public, should the workers with disabilities who now can return to their jobs, should they? It's a question that he's sort of left out, and I think any one of them certainly probably have at this moment.
Yeah, I mean, those are all good points. When I interviewed, I think I mentioned this, when I interviewed Nicholas Brown, he's the person, that to me is what's different now than 6 years ago. Yeah. 6 years ago, they didn't have Nicholas Brown, a really nice guy, huge smile, really personable, great to talk to. It's impossible to meet Nicholas Brown and not have sympathy for his situation, and that's something they didn't have 6 years ago when they did make cuts and nobody really made much of a big deal about it.
Was there also an argument about the state's minimum wage at that point, though? I think that also is an extra element that perhaps was not present in 2013. Yeah. It was a large reason why they had said that they were going to need to make the cutbacks. And by the way, other establishments in and around Springfield, just as an example, have made a similar argument. Well, the state's minimum wage is going to be going up, but can we pay it?
Sure, absolutely. Well, can the state pay it? Because when this comes around to $15 an hour, at this point in time, I'm not aware of any way the state has identified to fund some of the folks who take care of the less fortunate among us. And that's, folks, in-home care workers who are paid by the state of Illinois are going to have to get raises. And there's a lot of them. And so the state is thundering, and look, one problem that Goodwill had in this thing is they said it's because of the minimum wage. Well, the minimum wage hikes don't start kicking in until January. It's July, and so that's problematic. The way they handled it was horrible. Not just saying that these workers are less than productive, less than valuable employees, but they gave them essentially 1 week's notice. Nicholas told me we didn't even get a goodbye cake on the last day, and so it was a little hard-hearted. And so whether Durbin survives here, because folks are calling for her head, you got to go. You said these things, you got to go. Whether she survives or not, I think the issues that she's raised may actually be real at some point down the road. They didn't handle them very well, but they're not going to go away. And so social service agencies, I think, always have had a problem in Illinois, or long have had a problem getting paid. That's something that Goodwill had said through the years. Durbin herself had established a goal about 5 years ago saying, you know what, I don't want any more government grants. And the reason I don't want government grants, particularly from the state of Illinois, is the state never pays on time. There's too many strings attached to them. I want to have a successful program where I generate enough money where I can do what I want and not have to rely on the state of Illinois for grants. That obviously hasn't come to pass. That has been her long-term goal. And so, in the midst of some horrible, reprehensible things that she said, there's some kernels of truth there, and I don't know that anybody's really addressing them.
That's something that's so interesting. Republican leadership during session, I had sat down with Leader Durkin, the House Minority Leader, kind of during the budget negotiations, and he and some of his staff had said one issue they have with Democrats is they have a lot of great ideas about how to, they didn't say great ideas, but they have a lot of ideas.
Hold
they
on.
have a lot of ideas about how to improve.
Ideas nonetheless.
They have a lot of ideas about how to improve social services, how to improve social services,
Sure.
but they never say how they're going to pay for them.
Right.
And so, just to your point,
Mm-hmm.
it is an issue that Republicans have been. I mean, they mention that all the time.
Yeah. Well, you know, and Pritzker does have a certain way of doing math. I mean, his approach to, well, look, he's gotten pretty much everything he wanted in this last legislative session. You know, if the Democrats want a petri dish on how to run a state in the United States, look to Illinois, because that's, you know, there's nobody to say no right now. And so it's, on some level, I think, some folks may be looking at this as somewhat of a grand experiment. What happens when Democrats get whatever they want? And so at this point in time, you know, we've legalized recreational marijuana, some fairly dramatic tax increases. We've had a capital bill that's passed, and we'll get to that in a second. But you haven't figured out a way to pay for it yet. And so what the governor is saying, or is banking on, that next year voters are going to say, we like these Democrats so much, and what they've done so much, that we are going to approve a constitutional amendment to allow the state tax code to be changed so that it will no longer be a flat tax but be a graduated tax. Are the Democrats going to have enough political capital left come the election of 2020 to make that hump? I'm not sure that anybody knows right now. And what is their plan B? I mean, they've written a lot of checks, I think, and they haven't really figured out how to cash them.
For instance, this governor's office just announced today, the day that we're taping, that the Department of Public Health is going to forego Title X family planning money.
Okay.
And to supplement that, they're going to take the state's money out of the Department of Public Health's allocation to cover the $2 billion that it would have gone from the federal government. So they're kind of taking the state money, reallocating it. Well, what's going to suffer from whatever that allocation was going to go to?
Sure.
You know, so to your point again, they're sort of moving some stuff around and writing checks, and we'll sort of see.
Yeah. And we took a $7,500 bath on Confederate Railroad too, but that was last month's story. Let's, speaking of the Capitol bill, Sam, you recently did a story on the Armory here in Springfield. It's up for $122 million in fixes that's contained in the Capitol bill. What's that money going to buy, and why should we be spending it?
Well, it's a chunk of change, to be sure. It's probably the biggest chunk of change that building has received in a very long time. You might know that the last people to occupy the State Armory building were the state police.
Correct.
They left in 2008, so it's been 11 years since then.
And they couldn't get out quickly enough. There was no hot water there.
I mean, you walk by. I was walking by with a state official, and I mean, he was picking pieces of the grout off of the building, and there's mold everywhere, and that's just the outside. State officials have said that the power is turned off, the water is turned off, and you know, if that's been the case for the last decade, that's where you need to start. So to the point of the money, $122 million is getting sunk into this thing to first of all get it back up and running. It was a cultural hub in Springfield. A lot of folks remember the concerts, the circus, other big civic events that took place in there.
Van Halen played there, was it?
Yes, they did. Yeah, and
Brown M&Ms and all.
And I confirmed that point, as a matter of fact, with one of my sources. So a lot of exciting things happened there over the years, and community leaders and state leaders want to see an element of that return once the building is brought back up to a usable state. It's Tim Butler, State Representative Tim Butler, who's the representative here in Springfield, had said that the State Armory is emblematic of the larger capital plan, and saying that the State Armory is just one state building out of many that have not been properly maintained by the state over the years, and that now we're having to play so much catch-up on that maybe $122 million will bring it back up to a usable state to where concerts are going back in. Maybe it's just going to fix the roof.
Sure. I mean, you look at it from the outside, and obviously our coverage area extends beyond Springfield, but trust us on this one. It's a beautiful building. You know, it's right next to the Capitol, and the idea of scraping it is just so, we could never do that. It's like this marble-like edifice, or I don't know if it's what kind of rock it's made out of, but a pretty cool-looking rock. Yeah. And it was apparently part of the Works Progress administration. I mean, this had its roots in the Great Depression and the New Deal, did it not?
Yes, it did. It was one of many projects that President FDR used to get people back to work. There were even labor strikes, as I found out, when the building was going up. But it was constructed and put in place largely for the state militia. The state militias, they're known now, the Illinois National Guard, are out at Camp Lincoln here in Springfield. So they've not had a use for a long time. But Springfield and the larger community around needed, on top of a state place to house the state militia, somewhere for folks to gather. And political rallies and speeches have been held there as well. So to scrap it, I don't think is on the table.
Sure.
But to get it back up to a usable area is a question that I think is on a lot of people's minds. And again, emblematic of what the state plans to do with whatever it is, $45 billion worth of money over the next 6 years.
Well, I mean, the $45 billion, hopefully, because that's going to rely some portion of it on gas taxes, which is a much surer deal than the rest of it. The Armory is part of the quote vertical plan, as I understand things, and so whether that work gets done on that and some other structures. For example, UIS is due for a library, $35 million. That's not a sure thing because that's not going to be funded by gas taxes. It would be funded by, I think, probably taxes on gambling and that sort of thing that we don't have as much experience with, I think, in collecting. But you go back to the Armory, and I think the big puzzle, at least for me, and I think for a lot of others, is what purpose can you bring for it? Because Cheap Trick used to play there, Van Halen used to play there. Well, now they go to the Bank of Springfield Convention Center that's just down the street. There's lots of other places for bands to play. It's a big, empty space on the inside that was last used as an auditorium. We don't need an auditorium anymore, at least in Springfield. What do we need in Springfield? Maybe we should have a contest. What do we use the Armory for? What kind of uses have you heard proposed?
Well, Lisa Clemens-Stott, who runs Downtown Springfield Inc. Here in town, had said that, to mention your point about the Bank of Springfield Center, that place is so booked up that, quite frankly, they've run out of space. So whether or not it's used as a concert hall or a auditorium of sorts, there are 2 banks of state offices in that building as well. So folks like Representative Tim Butler want EPA employees to eventually come there because they'll be displaced by a rail project that's going on here in Springfield. So the potential exists. It's a blank canvas, but they've got to get it up and running first.
Yeah, and it's been a long-held dream by many to level the Stratton building. Nobody likes the Stratton building. For some reason, I've always kind of liked it. It was kind of, I once wrote about it and compared it to Jan Brady as the middle child of state office buildings. But my love for the Stratton building isn't shared by many who have to work in it. Is there any chance you think that we might come up with some hybrid way to perhaps move folks, are you hearing that at all, perhaps move folks out of the Stratton into there and into a remodeled, revised Armory? Is that possible at all?
It's a potential, but a lot of state officials sort of want that building to go eventually. I think that it's quite a ways off, but I think if EPA employees and folks on some of these satellite buildings around Springfield can get moved into a space like that, from what state officials tell me, that will be kind of the grand experiment for whether or not you can get somebody out of the Stratton building. And to your point about the Stratton building, at least it looks like an eye if viewed from above.
Well, it's the Politburo style of architecture, I think, is what it's been compared to. Let's talk quickly about some news that's just breaking today. An event that happened last May that nobody really knew about until just now. A close associate of House Speaker Mike Madigan had his home raided by the FBI last spring. This was a gentleman, Mike McLean, former state legislator, a former lobbyist, retired a few years ago, very close to the Speaker. When Mr. McLean retired, Mr. Madigan said very nice things about him. He was one of the most honest, integrity-filled person he'd ever found in his whole life, and now the FBI is knocking on this guy's door. This follows news that 2 other Madigan associates, Kevin Quinn, and help me with the third.
Mike
nope.
Zaleski.
You lose.
Sorry.
Sorry.
She's right, though.
Michael Zaleski.
Zaleski.
Wrong Michael, yeah. Former Chicago auditor, or excuse me, alderman. Their homes were also raided, all close to Madigan. Are the feds going after Madigan? I mean, what are we to draw? I mean, there's concluded these folks all have a common thread. ComEd has confirmed that they've received subpoenas. There's a lot of speculation going on right now. If I'm Mike Madigan, am I worried?
That's a good question. The probes seem to be directed at these people individually. It seems to be, the Fed seems to be wanting to draw connections between associates of Madigan. For what, we're not really sure. There's plenty of speculation as to what the Fed might be looking for. Right now, the speaker is contending with legal bills from a election suit. There's somebody who is challenging him in the Democratic primaries.
Well, hold on, time out for a second. We believe those are what those bills are for. That's been the speculation. Is it not possible that some of those bills, and it has been reported, something in excess of 1.7 million, 1.2 million in legal fees, is it possible some of those legal fees might have been spent not just on this lawsuit that we'll get to in a second, but on this?
That's the question. But but to your point about whether or not Madigan should be worried, somebody once told me, if you're going to take out the king, you make sure to aim. We're not sure if this is in any way going to eventually lead to taking out Madigan at the top. But you can say at very minimum that the Fed is looking for things in these people who just so happen to be very closely related to the speaker. Yeah,
and the federal government often operates by, we start talking to folks close to the person whom we really want to catch them in something, and who can you deliver that we'd be more interested in than you? And that sometimes is how it happens. That's not necessarily any guarantee that that's what's happening here. Perhaps just a strange coincidence. 3 associates of Michael Madigan get their homes raided by the FBI in the month of May, and it's just a coincidence. I think that some folks are finding it hard to believe that that's just a coincidence. The lawsuit that we're talking about, Gonzalez. This is to folks who don't live and breathe politics. This seems a little haywire. To those who follow Mike Madigan, it's just kind of who followed him for a long time. It's kind of a classic Madigan sort of thing that he would do. He solicited folks to run against himself on a Democratic primary race who had Hispanic last names, with the goal of diluting the Hispanic vote so that he would get the Democratic primary, and the bona fide candidate with a Hispanic last name, Gonzalez, is left by the wayside, which is exactly what's happened. Some interesting depositions, but Madigan also has said, you know what, even if everything you say about me is true, it's not against the law. I think he has a good point. Am I wrong?
His defense is twofold, that he has a First Amendment protection in that. So, like you said, even if everything is right, First Amendment, and then also the 2 individuals that are alleged to have been sham candidates. They have a First Amendment right to run for office. So there's nothing illegal here.
I mean, well, I just thought of this, so I'll just say it. I mean, Sam McCann didn't run for governor because he thought he could win. And that's kind of Madigan's premise here, which is people run for office for all kinds of weird reasons. And so, this reason might sound weird to you, but, everybody has a right to run for public office, and that's just how the game works in Illinois. It long has worked that way. Let's talk also, again, jumping around here a bit, always like to talk about recreational marijuana. Interesting story that you folks did in the last, I think it was last week, about community colleges and recreational cannabis. Give us a breakdown. What's the issue here? Yeah,
so my colleague Peter Hancock had done this really interesting story. The bill that Governor Pritzker signed into law legalizing recreational marijuana had this provision in it that allows some community colleges and four-year universities to explore the possibility of launching educational programs to teach people in the business of growing and marketing marijuana. The problem is
colleges have always done that,
whether it's clandestine or not.
The problem is that marijuana is still illegal at the federal level. The federal government institutes a policy at institutions of higher education to maintain a drug-free environment. So, if colleges sort of have these programs, there's a fear that they will lose not only federal funding, but that the students who attend these universities won't be able to get student aid. So there's some sort of gray area about how this would work. Some colleges are sort of exploring the possibility of maybe teaching students about how to grow tomato plants instead of pot plants.
You can smoke tomatoes?
I don't know.
They're hard to light, but
That's a euphemism, perhaps.
Apparently, tomato plants and marijuana plants are grown similarly.
well,
I don't know.
When I read the story, I was like, why didn't anybody? Come on, this seems pretty obvious. And I think that the federal's government stance on marijuana is well known. It's a very strict stance. Banks don't get involved in the marijuana industry because they're concerned about getting crossways with the federal government. I'm not sure if it's still a case or not, but not that many years ago, if you had a drug conviction and you wanted to get student aid, sorry, you sold marijuana. You're not eligible for federal aid. I guess I'm just staggered, but nobody had noticed this. I mean, how does something like that get through? Because reading Peter's story, it didn't seem like anybody has a really good answer to this one.
I think they maybe thought there were ways to get around it. So, for instance, SIU had announced their program to research cannabis production, and they're only limiting it to industrial hemp, which is legal at the state and federal level.
Yeah.
So there's a way sort of around that.
Okay. All right. Well, but there's no way around this. We are out of time. And so thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next week on Capitol View.